All right, you probably heard that sound that the recording has started. So we're going to start, and I am so glad that you're here. I know people are still arriving as we get started, and continue to tell us in the chat where you're located if you're joining. But this is why you came. You came to, well, not to see a picture of Kevin. You came to see, to hear what I have to think about. What are the 5 things leaders need now? And by now, I mean in 2024, in June of 2024. Like, what's happening? Like, what is leading like now? And I don't know if any of these words resonate for any of you, but I'm guessing they might. That things are maybe as uncertain as they've ever been. That there's things are diverse, people are divided, there's dispersal. It's hard. It's different, perhaps, in some ways than it's ever been. And so I wanted to start by acknowledging that, and to let you know that this conversation is coming from that place of where are we as leaders now. Let me be very clear that I'm a believer that human nature doesn't change all that rapidly. And so many of the principles of leadership have not changed. In fact, principles don't change, but context changes a lot and changes things we need to do a lot. So my question then is, which of these are your challenges? And so if one of these words resonates for you, or if you would use a different word to describe the challenges you're facing as a leader or your organization is facing for leaders, I'd love for you to just put those in the chat. And in fact, throughout our time together, I hope that you will use the chat to share your thoughts, insights, questions with me. For those of you that were already here, you know that I'm hopefully pretty good at following what's going on in the chat and being able to mention that. Kendra says, my leaders say it's harder than ever. Oh, distractions. Yeah, more things to distract us than ever. There's more change, perhaps, than ever. I think those are all true, and we could say a lot more. So continue to put those things in as you think of them. So constant change, Isabel says. So, I don't know. I recognize some names here, certainly, but I don't know exactly where you sit in your organization or exactly why you're here. I don't know if you're at the senior level in your organization, if you're a VP, a director, if you're a team leader, if you're a trainer or a consultant. I know there are some of you here. There are many of you here that I'm confident are here thinking about leadership from an organizational perspective. That is our bigger focus today, but you may also be an individual leader that wanting to improve. And I know that you'll get great value from this here. And I know that many of you are probably in both of those. Like, you're wearing both hats. Like, I'm hoping I get something out of this for me, but I'm thinking about this sort of organizationally as well. So I don't know necessarily what your job title is or your responsibilities are, but I'm pretty confident that you wouldn't be here if you didn't believe that leadership makes a huge difference in whether or not your organization is successful or not. And that you are likely, like me, a believer that if we can help leaders be more effective, then we can help our organization get better results. That's absolutely what I believe. And so I know that some of you know who I am, but those of you that don't, my name is Kevin Eikenberry, and I'm here today as your facilitator of this session, and I'm happy to be here with you. There's a bunch of things there that say some stuff about who I am and what I do. The most important thing probably for you to know, I guess I would say 2 things. Number one is that we work with leaders and clients around the world. So hopefully I have a perspective that might be a little different than the one that you bring from your own organization. And the other thing is I have the same perspective as you because I'm leading a team every single day, a team that's spread out across the United States, and that is largely remote. I guess officially we're hybrid. There's 2 people here today, the only 2 people that are ever here besides me. And so hopefully what I bring is a perspective you don't have or might not have, as well as walking in the shoes that you walk in. And so hopefully the balance in the bringing of those 2 things together will make this of great value for you. There are some nice things people have said about me over time. Again, as a way of introducing me, if you don't know me, here's a few things people have said about me that are very kind. And so let me then take us forward, because I started out, it's like, here's where we are today, and you've shared some feedback in the chat, which I appreciate. And you raised your hand for this, you signed up for this, and in part probably because of these bullet points. These are pretty close to the bullet points that are in the page that you signed up for when you signed up for this webinar. So we're going to talk about why getting the skills right now are more important than ever. We're going to talk about 5 specific competencies that I think are especially applicable today, and help you think about how you build a plan to grow those competencies. That's where we're going to head for our time together today. So since we're talking about leadership, I want to start where we often start, which is with our 3O model of leadership, which we introduced in the book, The Long Distance Leader. And this model says that leadership is about reaching valuable outcomes with and through others, which is when we often think about leadership. We think about those two things, outcomes and others. And yet who we are plays a huge role in it. So this green ourselves circle is going to be more of our focus today. Like, what do we need to be bringing? What are the skills that we need to be having if we want to make the biggest impact on the outcomes we get in our organizations and helping others be successful in making that happen? So today's focus is a little bit more on that green circle down there in the lower left than maybe some others that we do. So I promised you 5 skills. So before I get to the 5 skills, I want to give you 5 facts about the 5 skills. And so here's where we're going to start. Before I give you what they are, I want to give you these facts. Now that we've got context. So here's the first thing. The 5 that I'm going to share with you might not be what you expect. And I mean, I don't know what you're expecting. I mean, if I asked you to make a list of what you think they might be, I'm guessing at least some of them wouldn't be on your list. Pretty confident of that, actually. And while some of them are things you've heard of, they're not all brand new. Some of them are pretty close to being things that you may not have considered before, or certainly not considered in the way we're going to talk about them today. And because of the first 2 facts, I'm pretty confident that this is true, that if you have developed some leadership development training, or using any number of ways to train and develop your leaders, that at least some of what we're going to talk about is not there, or certainly not there in the way that we're going to talk about it today. And it's also true that all 5 of these things have a big impact. And whether you've thought about each of them before the next few minutes, I'm confident you will agree with me that, yeah, they can have a big impact. And I also think you will agree with this last fact, and that is that they are more important than ever. So there are 5 fast facts about the 5 ideas that I'm going to share, the 5 competencies that I'm going to share with you in the next little bit. But before I go any further, though, I just want you to know, especially if you've never been on a webinar with me, that if you've got questions or comments at any time, put them in the chat. Just go ahead and do that. You don't have to wait for some magical moment when I say, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask me? You can ask them anytime, and feel free to do so. And I will try to address them as they arrive as best I can, or when I feel like it'll be best to address them based on what I know is still to come. So I hope that you'll do that, and you'll engage in that way, and that it'll be more helpful and valuable for you because you do that. Okay. So there are 5 things about these skills, but I haven't unveiled them yet. We'll get them. I will say this, that in a world of uncertainty, which we clearly are in one of rapid change, which we clearly are in, and that showed up in the chat with a bunch of thumbs ups, right? In a world where there is division and disengagement and disillusionment and discontentment, when we have all of those, and you could put whatever other words you want to put in tight budgets and all of the other challenges that we face. I see your question, Keith. I'll get to it, but not right now. In a world with all of these things, I would submit to you that every every leader needs more peace. And as I was going through the slides a little bit ago in my final preparation for all of you, when I got to this slide, I just took a breath. And I just encourage you to do that right now. Like, I think this is true. That as leaders, we need a little more peace. I think as humans, we need a little more peace. And you can think about that in any way that you want. And I think it would still be true. More peace and less polarity, perhaps. More peace and less uncertainty. More peace just to help us be more successful with all that we have to deal with. And Keith, to be clear, that when you're wearing a blue shirt, you have more peace. Let's just be clear about that. So the letters that spell the word peace give us the 5 skills that we're going to talk about today. So not only do we need more peace conceptually, we need more of these 5 competencies that spell out the word peace. And I'm going to unpack all 5 of these, so you don't need to furiously take notes here necessarily. But by peace, I mean that every leader needs to be more personally proficient, to have more clarity about expectations, to have an accountable mindset. We're going to talk about that, to have comfort with tension, and to have an experiential focus. Now, there's a couple of words there. I said earlier that some of these things might be brand new to you, and a couple of these may so at least seem kind of normal-ish. And so you may say, well, Kevin, I've heard about expectations and accountability before, and I will simply say that I'm going to give you some new things to think about even on those 2 as we go. So Lorraine, the question is, will the slides be available? And the answer is, we will make them available. Okay. So you can take notes, of course. And by the way, some of you might not know this, but you're here live, so you get the ability to ask your questions, et cetera, and give me a hard time about my shirt and all those sorts of things. But for those who weren't here, this will be recorded. And that also means that you'll get access to the recording. So when this is done, which is the extension of the question about slides, you'll be able to share this with others in your organization. In fact, I hope that you will do exactly that. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of these 5 things: personal proficiency, expectation clarity, accountable mindset, comfort with tension, and an experiential focus. And so here we go. First, personal proficiency. So a long time ago, in my book, Remarkable Leadership, I wrote a line along the lines of this: that as we become a better leader, we become a better human. Now I flipped it around here, right? What I wrote originally was, as we become a better leader, we become a better human, and vice versa. And I flipped it around here because that's the piece that I want us to think about today. I want us to think about our leaders need to be, the personal characteristics of our leaders are becoming a more and more important component of their ultimate success. And so this is the first of those things. And so let's start with this question. And some of you may have read something I wrote a couple of days ago where I talked about some of this a little bit. And one of the questions that I encouraged people to ask is this: to ask their leaders, do you really want to be leading? Is this what you want to be doing? And perhaps to ask yourself that question. Because listen, being a leader is complex and hard and all those things that we talked about earlier. And perhaps, you've been leading a long time and it's not necessarily what you want to be doing now. How can you be as successful at it as you could be if it's not really what you want to be doing? And maybe you have leaders that got promoted because that's sort of what's supposed to happen. And that's sort of how we progress. And that's sort of how society sees our success. And so a person went into a leadership role and maybe even wanted that. And now that they're there, maybe a little bit disillusioned. Well, if we've got leaders in that space, that's not helping anybody. Right? Certainly not helping them. Certainly not helping the organization or the people that they lead. So when I talk about personal proficiency, I'm going to talk about some very specific things here in a minute, but I just want to start with that idea. Like, is this something I want to be doing? And if it's not, then it's time to find another place, another way to contribute in the organization. The next question is about engagement, right? If I can get my slides to move. Engagement. Are your leaders engaged? How can they engage, help others be engaged if they're not engaged? So we spend a lot of time organizationally trying to get create greater employee engagement, and I'm going to talk more about that before we're done today. But one of the linchpins to that is the model of our leaders. And if they're not engaged, if they've not made that choice or are not currently making that choice, how successful are they going to be at helping others? Not very much. And as I spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks thinking about this idea of personal proficiency, I thought about a number of words, including how centered do our leaders feel? How centered are they? How sure are they? How confident are they? And I don't mean confident in sort of an externally viewed way as much as internally. Those three words there are about how am I? How am I doing? How am I feeling? I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward to say that when we as individuals are more centered, sure, and confident, we're more effective. We're more personally proficient. And we would like more centeredness, surety, and confidence in our team members. And where are they looking? They're looking to us. And so I think that's worth thinking about. And the next thing that I think is critical, and I've said a lot about this over the last couple of years, is how clear are our leaders? How clear are we? Clarity is a powerful trait. Clarity is a attractive trait. Clarity helps us be more mentally healthy, mentally fit. When we have clarity, it helps us build the ones above as well. And so all of those are important for us to consider. So those things are all important, but there's a couple of other questions to consider. Like, what are the habits of our leaders? Are we developing the habits that we need to be more personally proficient so that we can be more efficient and effective and better models for our teams? And so this list is a list that is, I think, more important than ever, because I think what we're asking of leaders is different in some ways than ever. And the number of different directions in which they're being pushed and pulled, as we said earlier, is continuing to become more complex. And so I think for us to get this right for ourselves and organizationally to talk about this stuff. You see, I don't see very many organizations talking about this stuff. And if this stuff isn't going well, any of the other stuff that we try to bolt on in terms of the leadership development, in terms of skill development, in terms of all that other stuff, is going to be harder to catch if this isn't true, right? So the P in peace is personal proficiency. The first E is expectation clarity. There's no question that expectations drive success. That when expectations are clear, we are much more likely to move in the direction of success. And that's, of course, what we want. Back to outcomes, right? If we have clarity of expectations for ourselves, as we saw in the previous slide, that can help us be more effective. It can help others be more effective. And because of both of those, it drives us toward better business results. So when I say expectation clarity, I'm talking about several things. And the first thing I'm talking about is the fact that not only do expectations, clarity of expectations drive success, they actually define success. The number of people that I encounter that I ask, so do you know what's expected of you? And they can't give me clear answers, or they sort of fumble around to get there. The more fumbling, the less likely they can actually get there. Once we know what's expected, we know what success is. And when we have greater levels of expectation, we have less uncertainty. So there's plenty of uncertainty in the world. We don't need to add to it with things that we could fix. And one of the things that we can fix as leaders is to have clarity of expectations. And I'll talk more about in which directions in a second. Okay. But when we have clear expectations, now we know what success is. There's less uncertainty, which leads to greater confidence, which aids in our ability to focus because we know what to focus on. And so then we will almost automatically be more productive because we're working on the right stuff and we know it's the right stuff. And oh, by the way, when there's greater clarity of expectations, there's higher levels of trust, there's better relationships, there's less conflict. So, and if we can get this right, it is a huge lever. And I know that usually when we think about expectations as a leader, we're thinking about, well, I as a leader need to set clear expectations with my team. That's true. We'll get there, but that's not the only thing I'm talking about here. Like, do we have clarity ourselves about what we expect of ourselves as a leader? Do we have some clarity about what success looks like for us? What we expect of ourselves? Because if we aren't clear on that, then we run the risk of things like second guessing and guilt and shame and a bunch of other stuff, none of which helps us or serves us. So having clarity for ourselves about what we expect of ourselves is important. What are the expectations on us from the business or from our leader to us? Like, not only do we know what we expect, but do we know what the business wants, needs, and expects of us? That's got to be clear. And if the competency is expectation clarity, it doesn't mean, well, I guess the business isn't going to tell me, and so woe is me. No, it means I've got to go seek that out. I've got to go search for that. I've got to go make that happen if I ultimately want to be successful. And then, of course, expectation clarity is of others. The longer that I've been doing this work, the more important clarity of expectations I have seen it to become because it's so lacking. And so the longer I do this work, the more I find that this is a critical lever. And so it needs to be one of these things. And oh, by the way, when this is true right here, there's more peace, isn't there? There's less likely to be micromanagement. There's less likely to be second guessing. There's less likely to be so many of the things that cause the noise and get in the way of us ultimately being successful on our teams. So as leaders have the ability to have clarity of expectation in all directions, not just setting clear expectations with their team members, as important as that is, the more we can get at that, the better off we will be. Okay. So the question then would become, how well are we doing about that in our organization? And are we talking about this? Are we teaching this? Are we supporting this or not? And if not, then perhaps that's an area we need to be thinking about. So far we got personal proficiency and expectation clarity. So that leads us to A, which is accountable mindset. And I thought about what did I want to put here on this introductory slide, and I got kind of bold and said no blame, all responsibility. See, here's one of the challenges that leaders have always had. We get promoted, and even I have this. I sense this challenge when I'm coaching senior executives, even though it seems most obvious when we first move into a leadership role. We got promoted, leaders get promoted because they take responsibility and they get their stuff done and they have the ability, they have control over their work and their work's really good. But once we become a leader, we still have the responsibility, but we're not necessarily doing the work unless we're micromanaging, which we shouldn't be doing, right? So there's this shift that has to happen, that is that we have to recognize that we have to take ownership and responsibility, even if we don't have control. So the accountable mindset is bigger than just accountability, right? The accountable mindset is personal ownership. Several years ago, someone said, "Kevin, give me a simple definition for accountability," and my short answer in the moment was ownership. And I've thought about that moment many times. I know exactly where I was when I was asked the question, and the longer I think about it, the happier I am with that immediate response. We can't have accountability without a sense of ownership, but that doesn't mean as leaders that we have to be in control of everything, because we can't be, right? If leadership is about outcomes and others, we can control neither of those things, but we can influence both of them greatly. And so the accountable mindset understands the difference between what I have control over and what I can influence, and to recognize that I have influence on far more things than I have control over, right? And the accountable mindset also says that we're a model of accountability, which we're a model of not blaming, and that we're a model of looking for what could I do differently next time. So a model of accountability is someone who's raises their hand and said, part of this is mine, and what could I have done differently? Or what could I do to help you next time so that we're more successful? Not pointing fingers, but joining hands. And if we can get there as a model, we have a better chance of creating the accountability that our organizations so desire. And then the last bullet here says supports accountability. And here's the point. A lot of people, not necessarily those of you on this call, because you're probably somewhat self-selected for having chosen to be here. But for many people, the word accountable is a really long 4-letter word. Like, we only ever hear that word when something went bad. No one ever talks about it except when something went wrong. And so oftentimes leaders are asked, expected, or think they're expected to hold people accountable. Well, there's a time that we need to hold people accountable, but I think far more often what we need to do is help them be accountable. So supporting accountability is to help people see their role, help people raise their hand and say, I'm in, not because we're blaming them and not because we're throwing them under the bus, but because they are more personally proficient when they realize there's something that they did that had an impact or could have an impact next time on that result. So an accountable mindset is not one of who can I find to blame, because it's not blame, it's all responsibility. And so that's the key here. And so it requires a balance between challenge and support, for sure. Yeah, right. Like, are there times that we need to hold people accountable? Like tough love, if you want to say it that way, right? Yes. But accountability is not a negative 4-letter word. Accountability is a word of great power, because when people feel a sense of ownership, they act differently. And make likely, in most all cases, better decisions. And in fact, we'll take action, because ultimately, if we don't feel accountable and we think it was somebody else, we won't do anything. We wash our hands of it. And that's part of where we get stuck in our organizations. So we're 3/5, we're 60% through the peace competencies. So I'm going to just stop. I know that I've said it's okay to make comments. Mike says responsibility is for tasks, accountability is for results. Yeah, okay. I love that. So I'd love for you, if you have a question or a comment. Now I'm gonna take a mental breath, and so here's a chance for you to finish typing what you were thinking of typing. Trust is so important that people have to feel safe to learn and make mistakes. That's exactly right. So, which takes us back to expectations, right? Are we expecting people to be perfect? Right. I did a live stream earlier today. You could go find it on LinkedIn. With a gentleman named Elliot Parker, who wrote this great book called The Illusion of Innovation. And one of the things that we talked about in our conversation was this very point, that if we want to create innovation, real innovation, that we have to give people the chance to focus on learning. And learning by definition means it's going to be messy, and there's going to be mistakes, and there's going to be, and that's got to be okay. And so when you want to call it, that's certainly a component of trust. There's the psychological safety component of that, et cetera. Okay. So personal proficiency, expectation clarity, an accountable mindset. And the next one, and if you remember back to when you saw the first slide, this might have been the one that had you scratching your head. Comfort with tension. To start with, I'll say, let's say that as leaders, we need to develop our capacity for both and thinking, and that we need our leaders in our organization to have both and thinking. One of my favorite quotes from the author F. Scott Fitzgerald says, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. I love that quote. But it's not quite what I want to tell you today. So I used his quote as inspiration for mine. And here it is. The test of an effective leader is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind and apply each when needed. There's a tension between these things. And how do I look at both? Rather than I have to pick one or the other, right? And so comfort with ambiguity. This is part of the ambiguity, right? I want to say more about that, Mike, in a second, but I want to go back to the question: what's the best way to make sure that expectations are clear and people understand them? Have a conversation. We don't just send an email. We don't just tell them once. Like, I can't tell you how many leaders have said to me, man, I got this one person. They just don't seem to get it. Everyone else understands the expectations. It's just this one. Like, have you had a conversation with them about it? The way that expectations become mutually clear is by having a conversation. And here's the mistake that we make as leaders. It's clear to us, so we think it'll be clear to them. Like, this is like one of the biggest communication shortfalls that we all have, right? Like, it makes sense to us, so the way we say it to someone else is clear, except it's not to them, right? There's two problems. Problem number one is it actually clear in our head? And if it's not, there's no chance they're gonna get it. But the other one is we say it and they don't get it because we're not quite in sync. And so that's the big idea there, right? And Mike, to your point about ambiguity, like, there's more ambiguity in the workplace, in the business world, in the world, than there used to be, right? We used to say we need to build best practices because we knew what was going on and we knew what the needs were. And if we have that clarity, then we can build a best practice. We can go from there. The world's not that clear most of the time. There are far more situations where there are at least some things that are unknown, which means that best practices, if we try to force fit a best practice when there's some ambiguity, then the chances of that really working are not very high. Yeah, so it's not just a one-time discussion about the expectations. It's an ongoing one, because guess what else? As the world changes, as other things adjust, the expectations need to be reassessed. Perfect word, right? The expectations need to be reassessed, and we need to stay connected because of that, right? I mean, there's more kinds of expectations than just what's the work output, right? There's the what of the work, the why of the work, and the how of the work. And one or more of those things might continue to be changed. So we need to continue to assess, not only are my expectations still the ones that are most valuable, but do we need to adjust? And by the way, expectations both directions, not only what we have of our folks, but what they have of us. Okay. So Karen makes the comment that says, I think leaders should practice sharing their leadership style so direct reports understand them better as well. I have a more nuanced view than that, Karen, and I will say a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Okay. I mean, I certainly understand where you're headed, and I certainly agree with what you're trying to achieve with that statement, but I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. So comfort with tension is both and thinking. It's not just either or thinking, it's both and thinking. And that means as the situation changes, that means that as the context changes, we as leaders need to be comfortable with making adjustments. We need to be comfortable thinking about what I call flexors. Flexors being like outcomes and others, right? Which we said earlier, right? So are we focused entirely on the outcomes, or are we more thinking about the folks? And those could be at odds at times. And there are times when we may need to lean more into one, and times we may need to lean more into the other. And the context of the situation is part of the reason why we need to do that. And so being able to adjust along that flexor, opposite ends of the spectrum, if you will, which means that we have to be able to go beyond style, right? Because if I just use that particular flexor of outcomes and others, there are some styles that lean more one direction or the other, and that's fine. But if we end up using our style as an excuse for how we lead, not being willing and able to flex, then we're not serving the needs of the organization or our team best in that given contextual situation. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with leadership styles, right? And so certainly does it add value for our team members to have a sense of our starting point? I would agree with that. But to make it so black and white, and to take something as complex as human behavior and say, well, this is my style, and so therefore here I am, that is a slippery slope, in my opinion. Okay. Yeah. And so some of the comments that are going in there about leadership values and leadership beliefs, I think are a closer fit to where we want to try and get without sliding down the style slope. So we really need to get beyond polarization. We need to get beyond thinking about it's here or it's here. The right answer is probably somewhere in between. There can be truth at both ends, and yet sometimes we need to be able to flex our styles to meet, not just to accommodate the styles of others, although, Mike, that's certainly true, right? So we think about like a DISC assessment, which we're a big proponent of. We have a DISC assessment that we offer into the world. Like one of the things that's certainly true would be for me, knowing my style, to not try to communicate the way I'm best, but to understand your style, Mike, and adjust, move, flex in the direction of you. That's absolutely true, which is part of my point about being able to flex off of a style. Say, well, this is my style. Like if you've done DISC or Myers-Briggs or something like that, you've seen this happen in an organization. Well, I'm a D, and so therefore you should just understand that I'm a D. Well, that doesn't get us very far at the end of the day, right? It doesn't get us very far. So some of these ideas that I've just shared with you, I'll make an announcement here today. So I have a new book coming out. This is going to look like this is the actual book, but it is not, I promise you. I have a new book coming out next March called Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. This is a fake book, but it allows me to hold it up. See, it's really not the actual book. And so if you want to be an early adopter of those ideas and pre-order your copy now, there's big advantages because first of all, guarantee the best possible price by pre-ordering it because it'll always adjust to whatever the best price is. KevinEikenberry.com/flexible will get you a copy of that. So as we think about this comfort with tension, that's not all of what this book is about, but it's part of what this book is about. And that idea of flexors that I used is a big component of the book around flexible leadership. So we've talked about PEAC, leaves us one more E to get our piece finished. And to make peace would mean that we need to have what I'm going to call an experiential focus. And it's what I call the experience of work. Some of you may have read the article that came out this morning, which dives into this idea a little bit. That as leaders, we need to be, and our leaders need to be more aware of thinking about the experience of work, how our people are experiencing their work, right? It's like, how do they feel? What do they notice? What's working? What's not working? How are they experiencing work? Like if you think about going on a vacation, it's not just about where you went, it's about the experience that you had while you were doing it. And work isn't just about the result that we got or even the paycheck we received, but the experience of the doing of it, right? On a vacation, it's the experience of living, and in the workplace, it's the experience of work. And how are our people experiencing it, right? So it is about well-being, but it's about way more than that. Like it's about a whole lot of stuff. And by the way, it's about something beyond engagement. So you may be saying, well, Kevin, what you're talking about here is engagement, aren't you? Except that ultimately engagement is a choice that every individual makes. Like all of us decide whether we're going to engage in anything or not. Like, and while people can influence that decision, we decide. And I believe that the way we experience work impacts the decision we'll make about engagement. So as powerful and useful as everything about employee engagement that we've learned and studied and wrote about and all of the help that surveys have done around engagement, ultimately what we need to be thinking about is how do people experience work, because ultimately they choose to be engaged based on those experiences, right? Whether it's the human connection, on relationships, whether it's well-being, whether it's the way we do things around here, culture, whether it's do people feel included or not? Do people feel a part of things or not? Do people feel like they're valued or not? Do they like the workplace in all sorts of ways? Do they have a sense of success in their work? Do they have a sense of meaning that the work they're doing is important? Listen, do they enjoy it or not? Employees are the most important aspect of an organization. Experience matters. Quality of work depends on it. Retention rates depend on it, and so much more. Yeah, do they feel supported? Is work something that they are happy with as a part of their life. Now, we're not all going to be happy at work every day. That's not even what I'm saying. It's like, but ultimately it's how do we experience work, right? It could be seen in all of the things you guys are saying. Trust is in there. Workplace chemistry is in there. Here's the point. As leaders, we need to be, and we need our the leaders in our organizations to be thinking about it this way. And I believe that this competency is not been discussed in this way before, and it's incredibly important. And then if we can get our leaders thinking about the experience of work, we have a much better chance of them realizing what they can do to tweak it to make it better. All of the stuff you guys are saying. Yeah, all the stuff you guys are saying here. It's exactly right. So here we are. Every leader needs peace, personal proficiency, expectation clarity, an accountable mindset, comfort with tension, and an experiential focus. Like, this is what we need. This is what, if you had leaders in your organization with these competencies, would your organization be more successful on all levels? The answer is yes. And peace out in the world is complex. And peace, these 5 concepts, these 5 competencies are complex, and they're not perfectly straightforward. They're not black and white, just like being a leader is complex, right? So the question is, do your leaders, maybe the first question is, do you have this, right? And then the question organizationally would be, where are our leaders on this? Keith, your question is, would our pace of work affect our peace at work? Sure, but it's not a direct correlation, I don't think, because some people get excited by faster pace more than others do, right? So I wouldn't say it's a direct correlation, but I would say that if you feel invigorated by the pace of your work, then that would positively impact it. If you feel rushed, it might have an impact as well. So I think is it a component of that experience that we and how we experience our work? I think 100%. I think so, yeah. So where are you on these 5? Where are the leaders in your organization on these 5? And then the other thing is, you may say in your organization, hey, a couple of these are more important to us than others, right? Like, so the other question would be, which of these matter the most in your organization? Which of these match your organizational needs? Right? Like, if you know that you have a lot of uncertainty and a lack of clarity in lots of areas, then maybe that expectation clarity is of heightened importance in your organization. And only you can answer that. Certainly I can't from the outside without spending time with you or your leaders. Daniela says, I've heard leaders, especially middle managers, express that they are being asked to cover heavier loads, do more development now than ever without as much support as they'd like. I think that's probably generically a true statement. And to me, that takes us into many of these. Like, if they're not if that's how an individual leader is feeling, or the leaders in your organization are feeling, then we probably need to help them work on personal proficiency. We probably have to work on expectation clarity, right? Those 2 for sure. I mean, all of them could have an impact, but this is another way to use this peace model, is to say, what am I hearing? Which of these are impacted? Okay. Well, yeah. Does my boss's level of peace impact mine? Sure. 100%, and on up the organization. Exactly right. Yeah, without question. Okay. Other questions or comments before we go into the final stretch of our conversation? I'll just put it back where we were. But any other questions, comments, thoughts, anything that you want to ask? now, and I'll just leave this here for a second. Anybody? You are welcome, sir. Thank you, Karen. Anybody else? Comments, thoughts? Okay, so I promised you 3 things in this session. I've given you 2. There's 1 more to go. And that is, how do we get there? Like, you have to ask, if you've got your organizational hat on, you have to go back here and say, where are the gaps for us? Or which of the gaps are most important in our organization? And if you're in a role where you're trying to influence senior leaders, the challenge becomes one of, which is the one of these that will resonate most, or I can help draw a line, connect a dot for senior leaders. And that's for you to think about, right? And Keith, they do all start with us, right? Without question, right? So how do we get there is we have to ask ourselves those questions. We have to think about where our gaps are, and we have to start thinking about what we want to do to close them. And of course, that leads to what might we be able to do to help you? And I think there are a couple of ways we might be able to help. Hopefully this webinar has been helpful, right? And so one of the ways that we could help is you could say, man, I just wish that my organization could see this. Well, conceptually, you could send them all the recording because you're going to have the recording, and you could do that. But that's probably not going to go very far, right? So a better way to do that would be for us to deliver this in your organization. Maybe we tweak it a little bit. We put a little bit of your stuff in it and around, but fundamentally take the core of the piece model, put some of your content with it front and back, but to deliver to a broad slice of your leaders, we could do that for you. And we'd be happy to do that for you, right? But admittedly, this has largely been a conversation about the mindset and a conceptual conversation. So you may say, well, that's all fine and good, Kevin, but what we really need is some skills. Like, we really need to help our leaders build skill in one or more of these areas. And so we can do that too. We can work with you to build the training that you would want and need for any or all of these. Or you say, hey, Kevin, we need to work on help our leaders be more personally proficient. We would work with you to build specific training for you, virtually, in person, doesn't matter, like whatever works for you, we can do that. Or maybe you say, hey, I think we've got this pretty well, but man, it would be nice to get some external input, some external resources. And another way we can do is to provide you some blended learning stuff, some other tools to supplement your existing training. You say, hey, we're pretty close. But there's some things that you've shared that maybe we'd like some external help with, and just, some short videos, some emails, some various things that we could do to help support in one or more of these areas. And we'd be happy to do that, of course, as well. So we could help you in any of these sorts of ways. So if any of these things look of interest to you, here's how you could go about making that happen. The first thing is that you reach out to the person, your contact on our team. And some of you know who that is. And if you know that, then you can reach out to them and say, hey, we'd like to talk to you guys about Kevin delivering this exact webinar, or there's some of the skills in this that we'd like to have included in something that we're doing, or to build something for us, or to support some of your existing, not existing training, everybody. And if you don't know who your person is in our organization, we can solve that. You can put your email in the chat right now. We'll make sure we get that to you, or you can just email Jill@kevineikenberry.com, and we'll make sure, thank you, Marlene, we'll make sure that we get you that contact. And what'll happen is, then you can wait for an email from us. So like, you can proactively reach out to us, or you can tell us that. We'll make sure that we get the right person back in contact with you. Pretty straightforward. So I believe that these 5, before I go there, let me just look at Jeff's question here. The test of an effective leader is the ability to hold 2 opposing ideas in mind and apply each when needed. What's a real life example of this? Okay. Here's a real life example that might hit home for some of you. Question is this. We were in COVID and we had to have everybody working at a distance. And we want to bring everybody back because we think we'll get better outcomes if we do that. The outcomes will be better if everyone's back in the office. That's not necessarily what the others want. There's a tension between those two things, right? There's a tension. And where on that continuum do we feel that that's so important and so clear that we must? Okay. Then is that going to have an impact on others? It might. It could. Now let's take one that's less specific. Excuse me, there's more specific and less sort of big picture. So back to the first one though, where's the right answer? The right answer is probably somewhere between those two ends of that spectrum. Here's another example. As a leader right now, should I be asking or should I be telling? There's a time to tell. There's a time to ask. They're opposites. They're not the same thing. And my style might be, I want to tell. People ask me a question. I give them an answer. That's what they need. That's what's helpful for them. Well, listen, when people ask a question, if I ask a question back, then they might help come to their own answer, or they might clarify their own thinking, or I might be showing that I trust them, etc. Both of those things can be true. Where do I need to be in this moment with that person? That's a flexor. And most of us don't think about it. We go to whichever end or directionally within that spectrum that we need to go, or that we choose to go by natural habit or natural inclination, when the right answer is might be different in a given situation. So hopefully that helps a little. Ask more, tell less, maybe. And if you forced me to say one or the other, I would probably, that says something, Keith, about your inclination. My inclination tends to be the same. But it doesn't say never talk, never tell. And it doesn't say always ask. That statement simply says that it's a lean this direction. It doesn't say one or the other. So that's holding two ideas and adjusting based on context to get better results. Hopefully that helps a little bit, Jeff. So listen, like, you all came here because you want to get better business results, whether you're thinking about this for yourself or you're thinking about for your organization, right? Whether you want to get better business results, reach your goals, improve productivity, reduce turnover. That came up in the chat several times. You want to develop your teams. You want to build your culture. Like, I don't know what your reasons are, but here's the thing. Whatever those things are, like, waiting is probably not a good strategy. Like, when is better than now? So back to the three things. Like, you can reach out to us, your person. A couple of put your stuff in there, and Marlene has helped to facilitate those. Thank you for that, Marlene. If you know who your person is, just reach out to them. Say, hey, can we get on the phone and have a 15-minute conversation about some of the stuff Kevin was talking about? I don't know which of these things might work for us, or I know what I need. I know what we need. Can we talk about it? And then just reach out and have that conversation. That's what we're here for. And we'd be happy to help. That is what I have for you. I'll just leave you with this thought, and thank you again for your time and for your attention and for your questions and for your engagement. And to say that whether it's this or whatever, remember that success typically favors action as opposed to inaction. And the reality is that waiting is probably not your best strategy, whatever it is. And so if we can help you in some way with all this, we would be honored to do it. Just let us know. And Keith, I hope and believe it's going to be. So there you go. So thanks, everybody. We are officially finished. You'll be hearing from us. If you've got questions, let us know. And all the very best to all of you. We'll talk to you soon.